For our first lesson, I want to dive into what is usability. When I talk about usability, I'm really focused on making sure that products are easy to use for everyone in whatever context they're meant to be used in, so that it's really clear to people what they're supposed to do next, how to get the tasks done that they need to get done. So if you're thinking from a design perspective, what are the top 5 most important things that people must be able to do on my app or on my website, and you want them to be able to do that without much thought, without much frustration, and be able to easily complete those activities or tasks. This does not apply just to digital products, it also applies to physical products. Really everything has usability. You can think about the usability of products in any way. A camera, is it clear how to turn it on? Is it clear how to work it? Scales are really funny products to think about, because if you think of just like old analog scale, it's really easy to get on, get your weight. Digital scales all of a sudden can be much more complex. Usability is much more frequently thought of and discussed when it comes to digital products. Digital products are more complex because they have sort of a computer built into other products. There's a whole industry of people thinking about just designing products that are easy to use for people. If you think of industrial design, the whole design thinking movement and sort of philosophy applies a lot to processes, to products, not just websites or apps. So one of the questions I get a lot is how usability is different from user experience. Some people's definition of usability, and definitely how usability has evolved over the last 10, 20 years, has impacted the definition, how we think about it. But before I give the definition of usability, just being how easy a product is to use, and that's sort of the core of usability. But when we think about using a product, there's a lot more that comes to play to creating a great experience, and this is why the term user experience has really caught on, and even more recently people talk a lot about just the customer experience and calling it CX and not just user experience, like a much broader than the digital experience. Just how do your customers interact with your brand? And so instead of the product just being usable, which is one of the components of this honeycomb, this is my favorite way to kind of think about what user experience is and all the different components. There are actually lots of different infographics out there, but usability is really the blue one in the top left about how usable a product is. Equally important for the experience that your users have or your customers have is whether or not the product is useful. Is there a reason that they should need to use this product? And then do they enjoy using it? So a lot of the empathy and the enjoyment is much more frequently talked about when you think about the experience rather than just usability, although in doing a usability evaluation and doing usability testing, you'll also uncover a lot of the emotions that play a part of that. As you'll also, when doing a usability evaluation, figure out if something is findable or credible. Typically, though, those are also all components that are talked about when you think about the user experience and the sort of all touch points of interacting with a company. All of these things are important. Not just can someone accomplish this task, but do they trust the company in accomplishing the task? And the same with sort of desirability, like do they want to use your site versus your competitor's site? If it's easy to use, you get sort of a leg up, but if they really get some other joy from it, you stand out even more from your competitors. Usability is about how people use the product and interact with it, and if they can accomplish the task that they have set out to accomplish with the product. Accessibility is whether or not they can even get to the content and get to the features that allow them to accomplish something. And so you could think of accessibility as a component of usability, because if someone can't get to the information, it'll never be usable. It's also totally okay to think of them as 2 separate sort of criteria that you need to evaluate in making sure that your product is easy to use for everyone. And so really simple, let's say you're using an iPad and there's a widget on a website that uses Flash that's inaccessible to you because you're on your iPad, or if you're on your phone and you happen to have poor signal strength, you can't get to the app or the features, or it doesn't load fast enough for you to do what you need to do, which makes the app inaccessible. That hurts the usability because you can't even get there, but it is slightly different than just usability. I thought at this point it would be good to show you what an example is of poor usability. So what does it look like? Like we talk about what usability is and people using an interface, you want it to be a smooth process. And so I thought I'd show a video of where the user's trying to book a flight on the Virgin America website and they run into problems, and this hurts the experience of them booking a flight.
Connecting flights or non-stop flights. Okay, so here is where it's getting a bit confusing. I'm clicking over each of the. Oh, I see. That was a little bit confusing. I was clicking over the times, and it was highlighting the entire bar, and I thought that would be enough. But actually, there's 3 other boxes to the right: main cabin select, and first class. So I'm guessing I have to click on that. So I'm going to click on the main cabin.
In the video that you just saw about a user trying to book a flight on the Virgin America website, the study was done right after Virgin America had relaunched their flight booking process, and so they made some changes. And he had actually had a fairly smooth process until this point, and he had put in from where he was going to where he wanted to fly in the dates, but then he actually had to select a flight. And so he thought just by hovering over the times that he wanted, he would be able to select the flight, but he actually had to click on a price point. And it just took him a couple tries, a little bit of trial and error, which is really common when you see there's frustration or confusion in the design. And so he figured it out. He was able to accomplish it, but that would still be considered sort of poor usability because there was a moment of hesitation or frustration, confusion. I want to point out that this is a fault of the designers. And so when you see videos like this, or just happen to watch someone using a product and they're struggling, it's really easy to blame the user and just say, well, he should have known better, it's so clear, or he's just probably a novice internet user. But really the design, or we as designers, and any, like the broadest sense of the word, anyone involved in creating products, have to make it as easy as we can for people to use the products.
Okay, Google now. Navigate to Outback Steakhouse on Lindbergh.
Navigating to Outback Steakhouse.
That works. Well, no, that's not the right Outback Steakhouse. That's the one on not anywhere near Lindbergh.
Head north on East
Stop
Skyline Drive toward Little Drive.
Okay, Google now. Navigate to Outback Steakhouse on South Lindbergh. Maybe there's 2 of them.
In this video, you saw a user trying to use the Google voice commands to find restaurants near a movie theater. It's not actually returning the results, and he doesn't know how to change that, how to adjust the search to then give him the restaurants, not the movie theater, and he keeps repeating the same thing, which is also really common behavior. Sort of, I know this must be doable and it must be possible, I'm going to keep trying, but at some point they stop trying. And you're lucky if you're Google and people will keep trying, or if they don't have a choice because they're on their phone and this is the voice command options they have. But it creates still frustration, which is something we want to avoid in the design. What I fall back on a lot in explaining usability, especially if I'm explaining it to people I sit next to on an airplane, or if I'm explaining it to my grandparents, I usually boil down to what Steve Krug said many, many years ago and has continued to say is, don't make me think. And that's really what usability comes down to. And it's a really nice way to summarize it, is that we don't want to make our users think. So if they're faced with an interface, or a product, they need to know what they can do, what their options are, and how what they do next will impact what happens after that, but also depending on their goals, what should they click on, what should they tap on, which buttons should they press, and it should be really obvious. They shouldn't ever be stumped about what to do, where to go. So really clear examples if you think of just sort of any website, and knowing what you can click on or not, so what's clickable. I get a lot of designers who like to then argue and say, Well, users will, they'll just look for it. They like the exploration and the hunting for where they could go or what it might mean, or if you use terminology that's sort of different and stands out. I have had many discussions, not just with designers, but engineers, marketing people too, where they want to use a cool term, something that's a little different. But if users are stuck and stumped and say, I don't know what that means, I don't know where that will lead me and what that will get me, they actually won't click. And so they won't get there, and they, especially if you have a lot of competitors, will just go and use another website, or they'll redo their Google search and go somewhere else if it's not obvious where to find the information that they're looking for. One of the things that comes up a lot in user experience discussions or customer experience discussions is the user journey, especially if you're thinking around how the people that use your products are interacting with your company on multiple different touch points. And so usability fits into that. Let's say your customers typically touch 3 different channels. So they might go to your store and use your website and use your app, or maybe they also call customer service. There's all these different touch points with your company. If they encounter poor usability at any point, that negatively impacts the experience of that journey. And it could actually interrupt it so much that they just stop and they don't continue. And so you could lose someone along your ideal customer journey because you have poor usability.